This is Brian Jensen. This is the guy who I took my first ceramics class from at UVU. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that he does. It's fun to watch what he does. Some of you have seen some of his pieces up there. I talk about you. I talk about other people that I meet at different conferences and things like that. And he's here to show us drums, but also answer whatever questions you have about whatever. So he has all the knowledge.
Well, not yet, but I'm working on it. Hopefully someday. Is it time? Should I go?
It's time. Go.
Okay. So I think maybe I'll just introduce myself a little bit. Like Mr. Jones. You guys call him Mr. Jones? Okay. Mr. Jones.
She calls me Dad.
Oh, well. Is it your daughter?
That's my daughter.
Okay. Otherwise, that'd be weird. Anyway, so what do you need to know? I work at UVU right now. I'm one of the professors that teaches ceramics there. I've been there probably, I don't know, it's close to 20 years now. But I also taught at the high school level for almost 10 years down in Cedar City. Anyway, I think this year I am celebrating, not that we normally celebrate things like this, but I think I'm celebrating 40 years working in clay. I took in middle school, I had art classes, and in a closet there was a potter's wheel, like an old wood kind of homemade wheel, and I didn't know what it was. And I asked the teacher, I said, "What's that for?" He's like, "Well, that's a wheel. You make pots on it." And I'm like, "Can I use it?" And he's like, "No, not really." And I just kept bugging him. And finally he said, "If you get your assignments done, you can go in there and, goof around." And I was like, okay. So that was like the first time I kind of dealt with clay, and started using a wheel. And then when I got to high school, I was pretty excited about it because I had already, learned some stuff in the closet. But I really didn't know what I was doing. I was pretty serious about ceramics in high school, but didn't really think it was like a serious choice for a career. I just thought it was kind of a fun class, and I was kind of more interested. Well, I told my parents and the school counselors and stuff that I was going to be an orthodontist, which made them happy, and they were like, "Oh, he's got a good plan." But I wasn't really interested in fixing teeth. I was into art and everything. I went to college, and I was still telling everyone I was going to go like pre-dental, and I started taking those classes, and I had no interest in it. I was mostly interested in art classes, and I was on an art scholarship. I was like the Sterling Scholar in art for my high school, so that came with a scholarship. So I had to take art classes, but I was also taking like pre-dental type stuff, which I didn't like at all. And then at some point I finally changed my major officially to an art degree, but I didn't see any way to make money in anything except for illustration. So for most of my time I painted and drew in college as an undergraduate. And then there were, I don't know if this is what you were hoping for, but I'm going to give you the background. I was almost done with my college experience as an illustration major, and I started working as a professional illustrator doing freelance work. And back in those days, in magazines and books, if there was any type of image in there, if it wasn't a photograph, someone had to draw or paint it. We didn't really do much on computers. And so I started working for different magazines and painting and drawing whatever they needed. And to be perfectly honest, I hated every second of it. I liked painting and drawing what I wanted to paint and draw, but I had no interest usually in what they were asking me to paint and draw for these magazines. The last job I did that kind of like was the end of that career, an art director from a magazine called me up, and I'd worked for this guy for quite a bit, and it was going to be a high-paying job. Now it might not seem like much, but it would pay like 2 months rent just to bust out this painting. And he wanted me to paint a map of ancient Babylonia. Doesn't that sound awful? I mean, that was like, ugh, and I remember like, you gotta be kidding me. And I'm like, don't they already have those? And, why do I have to paint it? And he's like, make it more interesting or whatever. So I painted it, got paid, but I knew right then that I shouldn't be an illustrator. I didn't have any interest in it, and it was just a job. I mean, I might as well be like a plumber or something. It'd probably be better to be a plumber than illustrator. But I decided to go back to school and study what I wanted to study, even if I didn't have a plan for a career. And the thing that I enjoyed the most, and I always wanted to be doing, is ceramics. I wanted to be in the ceramic studio. I mean, as a student, even though I was an illustration major, I was in ceramics all the time. I mean, I'd sleep, eat, everything, it was always in the ceramic studio. So that I just kind of switched over. I didn't have a plan for how to make money. I just thought I'd just figure it out. And that's kind of what I've done. I ended up getting an art education degree so I could teach, taught high school, moved up to university. I went to grad school in Pennsylvania at a school called Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania, in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. And and so I got my schooling done, and have been dragging my wife and kids all over the country doing the things that I feel I need to do. Anyway, if you have questions about any details, you let me know. But today the plan is to make these drums, like that one. And I think this is kind of an interesting thing to demo for you guys, because what I'm doing on these drums is fairly unique. I've never seen anybody else ever do this throwing technique that I'm going to show you today. Mostly because I don't think there's a lot of people out there that make these type of drums. When I was actually a student back, probably it was the late 80s, early 90s, I saw these type of drums. They're called a doumbek, or in different countries or different regions they call them different things, like Durbekle or something like that. But commonly they're known as a doumbek, and they're kind of a Middle Eastern drum. But traditionally they were made in ceramic like this. They were, a clay drum. You will see them kind of made in metal sometimes, but I saw these drums, and then there was another student in the studio that was trying to make them, and he was doing all right, but I was like, I need to try that too. So I took what I could from him and tried to make these things. The problem is this, they need to be a certain size. I mean, you could make little ones if you want, but to make a proper one, they should be fairly big. These are supposed to be, used, you play them over your leg like this, so they sit right here kind of in your lap. So they should be big enough that you can like play them, and the back of it should hang over enough so they're kind of balanced here, so you don't have to like hold it or pin it between your legs. That's the traditional way to play them. But I didn't know how to make these. I was just the first drums, and I see a few of them around because I gave them to family members and friends, but they look like a mixing bowl with like a hole in the bottom. They were just not good, and I couldn't really throw anything this big. I definitely couldn't throw it very thin, and one of the biggest issues, and this is the reason that I'm going to show you this technique, is with a drum like this, I think it's obvious that you don't want a lot of warping or distortion in the firing on the head, because you normally want that fairly round, and it's also nice if the bottom doesn't warp like crazy. If you just throw like a cylinder, let's say I just threw this in one shot, just like made it like this, the bottom would warp like crazy. And if you don't believe me, just try it for yourself and see what happens. But because this bottom section doesn't really get thrown and compressed, it will move all over, usually in the firing. So I had to figure out a way to make these, because there was no one I knew that was making them. And so I came up with this technique, and I don't know what else could be done. I've kind of thought about like this technique and using it to make other types of things, and I've kind of messed around a little bit, but I've mostly just kind of used this technique for drums. And I mean, I've practiced this a lot because there was a time kind of in the early 90s. I don't know if you guys you would know your 90s popular culture, but there was a kind of a, what's a good way to put this? There was a time when people were thinking they wanted to be kind of hippies again. I think I call it the granola phase. Do you remember that? Anyway,
I'm still in
lot of drum circles. A lot of people like these drums, and so there was a big market for them. And I was selling these drums to everybody. I sell them through music stores. I'd go to like Grateful Dead concerts and try to sell them out of the trunk of the car and stuff. It was that didn't work so well, but I tried. It seemed like the right place. It wasn't. Anyway, but I made tons of these drums. I'm sure hundreds and thousands of them. I didn't keep track. But if you want to make these, I would say I'll show you what I can, and then you got to practice a little bit, like with everything else in ceramics. Flip that a little bit. Anyway, I'm gonna throw on a bat here. Oh, you know what I need to do before I throw on a bat? I need to get some clay ready. Let me grab this real quick. I'm gonna, for a proper sized drum, I'm thinking I probably need about, I would say about 10 pounds, 8 to 10 pounds. I think those two, one it was, last night I made those, and one was like 10 pounds and the other one was closer to 12. So we'll see if we can tell the difference. But I'm just gonna, this clay is super wet. This is just a scrap clay that it's just all mill scrap. I think that's probably about,
We have a scale.
you got a scale? I think that's probably close to 10. What do you think? Should we go bigger? That might be, I bet that's 11. What do you guys think? How do you know?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, okay. Tell me what that says.
15.
15?
Yeah.
All right, how about that?
Oh, 13.
13?
That's 11. That's 13.
All right, I'm gonna make a couple of these.
That's 11.
That's 11? All right, 11 pounder. We'll do 11
It's
pounder.
11, guys.
Good job, Pat.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm gonna wedge this up real quick. This clay is a little too wet for this, but I don't really have much of a choice to it. Time to go.
I don't know what you're saying. You can say it loud.
We have our plate over there.
Oh, your clay is a cone 10 clay, correct?
Yeah.
So he's gonna fire these hotter, which also means that he will make them bigger for shrinkage, right?
I'm not sure.
I take what I get.
It's
I'm not too.
whatever you get to and adjust.
So, I'm going to use one of these bats. I put bat pins in here. And with this, it's not the most important thing, but you could do this without, but it definitely makes it a little easier. Anyway. My trusty towel. Okay, so. Here we go. Ready? How much was this? 11?
Yeah.
With this much clay, I usually will cone it up. Pretty straightforward. Should I talk about that a little bit? When I center a bigger chunk of clay, I typically will use kind of my right hand as a dominant hand. And notice I grab the far side of the clay and I'll pull that towards me as I'm pushing with my left on the inside. So it's kind of like that. You don't need to be, super strong if you have good technique. And then what that does by coning up, you're getting rid of a lot of the imperfections, the major ones. And then you can just like smash this back down. And if you've done that fairly well, there's not a whole lot of centering to do. It's still not centered, but it's pretty close. Can you see that little, that's the bat slipping around, but that's okay. It's close enough. I'll just give that one little push. And you will get to the point as you learn to throw that you can kind of clean things up as you go. Things don't always have to be perfectly centered, but as a beginning student, sometimes beginning thrower, I should say, you know, it's sometimes, you'll fight it less if you can get it good and centered. So I'm gonna open this up. Now, because this is gonna be just kind of a hollow tube, I'm gonna go all the way down to where I touch this bat. And I'm gonna open that up maybe like 4 or 5 inches, okay? That's that. Now I got this big donut of clay, and I'm gonna start lifting this up. With these drums, I think the best thing to do is to try to get as much height out of this as you can. But, and I'll show you this in a minute, if we open these up, the bottom is still left fairly thick because I'm gonna throw that bottom section after the fact. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But so you don't have to really thin it out a bunch. And what you probably should be kind of careful of here is not to go to the connection between the bat and the clay. Needs to be fairly thick so it doesn't separate off the bat and give you trouble. So I'm not gonna worry about getting too thin down at the bottom. Just right now I just need to get this kind of like stacked up and going vertical. And then, now it's heading the right direction. This bat and pin combo is like a little knife coming under. If I put my fingers on there, it's gonna slice my fingernails off, so I gotta be careful of that. But if I shout, see, that's probably because my fingers are getting sliced. Anyway, make some pulls here. There are some things that I need to consider when I throw these. The top section here, I need it to be round, kind of like the shape of your hand, okay? That because when you play these, you're gonna be hitting your hand on there, and sometimes you hit it pretty hard, and you don't want it to be like sharp or uncomfortable. You want it to fit kind of the shape of a hand. So there is that shape, but the thing that's important about these drums is that top edge, that rim needs to be, the edge right there needs to be the highest point. If these turn in at all, what happens once you get the head on there, they'll kind of buzz because the skin will hit on, you know, more than one spot, and it'll make a weird noise, or not. It won't be nice and clean. So there are some things that I really have to consider with this because they are, you know, a functional item. It's one of the, I mean, might be one of the only things that I do that's a musical instrument. And I know that it's kind of weird to think of this as being a musical instrument, but I think because I fire these to high temperature, the ceramic product that you get it has a really unique kind of almost metallic sound. The traditional potters that make these, like in Pakistan or Egypt or wherever these are being made, they make them out of low temperature clay, and so they're basically making these drums out of like a flower pot type material, like an earthenware or terracotta or whatever you want to call it. And they don't sound very bright and metallic. They sound a little dull, like a flower pot. And so I've had professional drummers that play these type of drums. They really like my drums because I'm one of the only people that makes them and fires them to high temperature. So that's kind of a unique thing. So let me talk about what I'm doing right now. I think I've got the bottom thin enough, even though that's not as thin as I want it for the final product. I'm gonna leave that kind of the way it is, but up here I need to get the top of the drum kind of established. So I'm gonna make these poles. The thing that I'm most concerned about here is not having a shape that's kind of weird and wobbly. And right now I'm starting to kind of see these low spots right in here. That's the type of thing, if you don't address that, it'll probably want to collapse on itself. So I'm going to get in here and just make sure that the line, the profile, so to speak, is a little more clean. And then I'm going to kind of close that down a bit. This is going to be a good drum, I can tell. It's going to be pretty tall and long. And I think there's a lot of little things that after you make a bunch of these, you kind of can imagine what they'll sound like after they're all done. I've got a puddle of water down there, so I'm gonna mop that out. Don't need all that. Jeez. And then I'm gonna start doing a little ribbing, just to clean this up. This rib right here, I don't know if you guys have ever, any of these around the studio, but it's just a metal rib, but it is probably the tool, one of the tools, I guess, that I use probably the most. If I didn't have this, I'd be in trouble. But I'm gonna rib this a little bit just to kind of strengthen this. This, like I said, this clay is quite wet, and I need to kind of compress the clay and get this cleaned up a little bit more so it doesn't want to collapse on me. So I'm going to rib the outside, then I'll rib the inside. And it's more about just getting the shape right now. So that's pretty good there. Now, I'm gonna just kind of like, I have to kind of imagine what will happen a little later because the bottom section is gonna be thrown in a minute and shaped. But right up here, I'm gonna just try to make this nice and round. Kind of clean that up. And sometimes, let's see if I've got to use just a standard little kind of metal rib that you guys probably have around here. Now, that looks pretty good. I'm just gonna push this out just a little bit just to kind of get a slightly more round shape and kind of establish the curve inside there, and that's probably pretty good. That section right there. Anyway, you could, sometimes I get a little carried away with trying to make everything just right, but what I want that top edge, remember I want that to be the highest point, so I'm gonna kind of set that right now. The other thing that's important about these drums, to keep things nice and round during the firing, you really need to compress that, what ends up being both sides, both rims, top and bottom. So I'm gonna use this sponge and I'm just gonna like spend a little time here, and what I don't know if you can see what I'm doing, but I'm using kind of the side of the sponge and I'm just trying to compress that a little bit with the sponge and with my fingers. With this hand, I'm kind of pinching it a little. I'm just, if I spend a little time, and I might be making it a little bit thicker, but that's good. That'll make it stronger and it'll stay round. And then I'm gonna kind of finish by just ribbing that a little bit more and getting the shape right. That's pretty good. Now, do you guys have any bags?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you told me you got the bags. If I can have 2 bags, this is kind of the start of, what I've done so far is not a big deal, it's just a thing. But this is, what? You guys do that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
for sure.
So, I have to file it. So thank you. So what I do here, the plan is, this is the thing that I don't think I've ever seen anybody really do before, the way I'm doing it, is that I want the top section to dry up, but I don't want the bottom section to dry, because I'm gonna come back in and throw this. So what I do is I'll take a little wad of plastic bag and I'll shove it down in here, kind of cork that off. It's about to that level. And then I'll take this bag, and I typically, I don't know why I usually fold those, and I'll use that folded edge up on the top so I can I know where I'm at. And I'll just kind of wrap that around, and what the idea here is then I'll let this dry to leather hard, and hopefully the bottom will stay mostly wet. So that's the idea there. Okay, should I do a second one real quick, just so you can see it again? And I won't talk so much, I'll just work. Let me go wedge another piece of clay. The nice thing about this, I think you could make a drum as, like, there's no real limit in size because you're only throwing half of it at a time. So whatever your max is, you could, you know, I guess whatever amount of clay you can center, you probably can maximize that more so than with other things that you might make. Should we make a big one? Should we just use it for the rest of the clay? Might as well, right? So, maybe. Whatever. So that was probably about 15, and there's a couple more, so that's probably like 18-ish.
Let's do it.
Do it.
Let's do it.
We'll make
Let's
a big drum.
do it.
And you all have
What's
to
the
be able to
biggest
do this,
drum?
18 pounds.
18 pounds?
Is that the requirement?
That's a requirement.
That may take me a week just to
18
wedge
pounds
it.
or you
Let's
fail.
check it on a scale, see if I'm close.
What's
Parker
the
will
biggest
wedge it
drum
all.
you made?
I've got one in my basement that's about this tall and the head's about this around.
Oh, that's nice.
And it shakes the house. We can play it. It does rattle windows. It's really basic.
I wanna see. You gotta have it like slightly cropped off the ground though, right? So
How big is the
usually-
Caleb Jones?
You lay it on, I lay it on the
28
floor. and
28
then
inches is the
we
biggest
just
you can
straddle
go.
it to play it 'cause it's so big.
Put a chair
It's
on.
like a horse. Yeah, it's a little pony.
If you do a 28 incher, that could be the last firing of the year for one person.
Okay.
You can make the
Looks like I need to do a 20 inch.
Yeah.
And then
Go
put
bigger the caliper, and then you fire it separately, and then you.
Well, I feel like you just join them.
Yeah, or you take like the torches and just.
Okay.
I just. It's too far.
17.
Oh, it's only 17 and a half. What a disappointment.
Really?
That's more than the last like 6 pieces I've made.
That's like 3 times all of this.
Does that gonna have any dog to it?
It does, quite a bit. But it's just my scrap, so it could have lots of things in it. So, just cone that up. Hopefully this is mostly centered. I mean, you could go back in and make another pass if you wanted to really get it closer to being centered. And I usually just kind of cross my thumbs and just push it down. I spent some time in Korea a couple years ago, and the Korean potters throw very differently. And I think they're smart, and I've been kind of working on their technique. What they do is they'll throw like they'll probably pug a big like log, and they just slap it down. So they start with like a big log of clay that's like this tall, and they just shove their arm down in, and they start pulling from there. So instead of what we do, which I think most of us do, is that we spend a lot of time, centering, and we squish the clay way down, and then we spend a lot of effort picking it up. They just they start with something that's like this tall, and they just mostly stretch it. So, but the clay they use is pretty awful. Well, by our standards and what we think is a good throwing clay, their clay is pretty rough. But anyway, I've been kind of using some of those techniques, and it's for some work it works really well.
Isn't it, I've heard you say it before, isn't that called when you throw off the block?
Off the hump.
Off the hump,
Off the hump? No,
that's
bit
a
different.
little different. That'd be like making a lot of little pots usually
Oh,
off
I
of a
thought
big
that's what.
big chunk. But this is just like they'll start with like a big log that's like this tall, and they just shove their hand down in there. So like they start with something that's up to their elbow, and then they make a few pulls, and it's like this tall, and then they stretch it out. It's a pretty good idea, actually. All right, let's see what I can do with this. This first pull usually is what I think of as the especially with this amount of clay, I need to get this clay aimed in the right direction. So I kind of get it so it wants to go up. Then I can go down and make my normal pulls. While we're sitting here, the other day I made a pretty cool acquisition. At my high school, we had to start on kick wheels. You guys know what that is? So all like the freshmen had to learn on kick wheels, and then as you either got bigger, like you grew up a little bit, or you were older, you could switch over to the electric wheels. Anyway, I just found what I believe is one of the wheels that came out of my high school, and I drove to the middle of nowhere to go pick it up. So now I've got an old wood kick wheel that probably came out of my high school. So I'm kind of excited, but I haven't made anything on it yet.
I had a kick wheel for a while and I sold it. Took up a lot of space.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Brandon has a treadle wheel at his house.
Really? What kind?
I don't know. It's from Stoke-on-Trent, place in England. I don't.
Where did you get that?
I don't know.
Do you want to sell it?
No.
Why not? Who does it really belong? Whose is it? Is it yours?
This lady at my old school had a son who was into pottery.
Mm-hmm.
He got it somehow, and then he doesn't use it anymore and moved away. And she didn't know what it was, and I didn't either. So she just gave it to me.
Right. So you
now
want
I
to sell it?
just have it. No,
Why not?
because I don't have anything else.
I'll trade you.
And honestly, I traded electric wheel probably.
Okay, we should probably talk. I don't know. Do you know the history on a treadle wheel from that part of the world?
Mm-mm.
Huh? No? So that probably came out of a pottery called the Leach pottery.
Yeah.
And Bernard Leach, or Bernard Leach, as he would have said, it probably had some connection to him. So might be something. Anyway.
I can probably look through my photos. I probably have one.
No, it's worth it. I'll give you $50.
It's antique. I
No, this is a
It's-
knockoff.
It's old.
Is
This
it?
one's not real.
It's like 120 pounds. It is very heavy.
Well, don't give it away.
Yeah.
You could sell it to me. Okay? I'll trade you for an electric wheel as soon as I get an extra. What do you think?
Probably.
All right.
And electric wheels are worth mint right now.
Yeah,
so.
they are even more than ever before. Okay, this is becoming a big drum. But before I kind of get the drum shape going, I'm just going to try to get a little more height out of this. And I think it's always better to if you can, this clay will stack up pretty tall when it's nice and straight, but if you start getting really crazy with it early on, you're going to probably have it collapse on you. Probably. I think
With
that's.
these, they don't need to be too they need to be circular, but that one has a decent amount of wibblement, but that doesn't really matter too much, does it?
Not to me. Where's it got a wiggle? All right, at the top?
Well, yeah, it's just
I'm gonna fix that
yeah,
though.
okay.
Don't worry about that.
Don't worry about it.
I wasn't worried about it.
Okay, good.
Do you travel a lot of places and study other people's way of pottery?
I do a lot. That's one of the perks of being a college professor is that you get to, part of our job at the university is not just teaching, but it's to do research and sometimes that means travel. So yeah, I've been all over the world and plan on going to more of the world until I'm too old or can't walk or whatever. But yeah, I'm going to be in France in a couple of weeks for our spring break. I'll be in Denmark and Germany in May doing ceramic things. I think next year I'll be in Prague and Germany again. The year after that I know I'm going to be in Japan. So yeah, it's all business.
So cool.
So it's a nice part of the job, which I have always wanted, and sometimes it's hard to justify just going on vacation all the time, but if it's your work, it's...
So do they pay for it, or
What's that?
do they pay for the trips?
It depends on what's going on. Sometimes I pay for things out of pocket, sometimes the university pays for some of it, sometimes a little of both.
Do you have a favorite place you visited? Like, for pottery?
For pottery?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard. I don't know. There's a lot of good places that, I mean, like I went down and spent some time in Mexico and worked with there's a community down in Mexico called Mata Ortiz. It's very famous for the ceramic work they make, and kind of the now prominent man in the community is a good friend of mine, and I get to go down there, and that's kind of like, I really like being there, and the people are super nice, and the things they do are so different than what we do as far as how they approach making their work. But then a place like Korea is like very different, but probably a little kind of interesting, probably closer to what I do is the Korean potters. But the work I make, they're like, well, how do you even have those ideas? How do you come up with fresh ideas? Well, by the way, you guys should know that drums are not normally what I do. I haven't really made drums since the early 90s. But my work is not exactly like this. That's going to be a healthy drum.
When you fire something at a higher cone, does it shrink more than it normally would?
It mostly depends on the type of clay that you're using. Like a porcelain at high temperature probably will shrink about 20%. This clay shrinks right around 10%. So, I don't know. What do you think your Cone 5 B-Mix
I think
shrinks?
we're 10 to 12.
So it's probably about the same.
And it depends on if it's straight out of the bag or if it's a recycled. The recycled has a little more water in it.
It also has like more rock and stuff. So.
Yeah, because it has other random clays in it.
And needle tools.
And needle tools occasionally.
Paper
What's got
towels.
Free
paper
tools?
towels.
Yes, sponges.
I found a rock one time. I was throwing a piece and it suddenly hit my hand. I was like, what the crap? Pick it out as a rock. Like a piece of asphalt from the road. It ruined my
Stick
whole.
no shoe in it.
Yeah,
I feel like you have to deliberately do that.
It was
I
a
don't know.
prize.
I was very happy.
Whoever gets it wins.
You did it.
Well, when I taught at the high school, students were always like, "There's crap in our clay," but I mean, it was all like clay from the factory, and there was like cigarette butts and all this stuff in there. Because I'm sure the guy making the clay was smoking and just throwing his stuff in there. But anyway, maybe I shouldn't even say this because you might not want to deal with these bad ideas. But in France, and I think in other places, maybe Mexico too, like for your birthday and your birthday cake, they bake a little toy in the cake, and if you get it in your piece of cake, then you get like a prize. So I started doing that. I had a very distinctive little toy that I would throw into the clay mixer, and then it would come out in somebody's clay, and if they got it, then I'd give them a free bag of clay.
Oh, nice.
And so every time people found something in their clay, instead of being all like, "Ooh, I found some crap in my clay," it was like, "Oh, I think I won," and then they're like, "Oh, I didn't win. It's just a cigarette butt."
Just a
But
cigarette.
anyway, it changed everything. Everyone was like excited to find stuff in their clay.
Yeah.
Now it'd be, it's just a vape cartridge.
Jones.
Yeah.
Oh, you want me to do that?
That's a good idea.
Just
Yeah.
start vaping, smoking.
All right, that's good enough there.
You need more bags?
I got this one here, and I can use that other one. All right, enough of that. Try and get the air out of this. Shove it down in there. All right, now let's get to the exciting part, really. And that is finishing these up. How much time do we have? Really?
40 some odd minutes.
All right.
Plus into lunch if there's.
Oh, we won't do that. Lunch
Half of
is,
them are in here during lunch anyways.
well, still, lunch is
I wouldn't say half.
precious.
I'm not allowed to eat today. I got a lot of too fast. I can't eat.
Yeah, he's getting his wisdom teeth out and he's going to do it.
All right. That one, okay.
Make sure that wheel's off.
Yeah, just
What's like the most bizarre
So many
pottery
drugs.
technique